The year was 1983, and the world teetered on the edge of nuclear annihilation. In a remote Soviet radar station deep in the Uzbek SSR, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov stared at his console as warning alarms blazed across his screens. The early warning system had detected an incoming missile strike from the United States. Hundreds of nuclear warheads were hurtling towards Soviet soil. Around the clock, Petrov knew that his report would trigger the greatest invasion in history, launching Soviet nuclear missiles against American cities in retaliation. But something was wrong. The detection had come too quickly, too perfectly, like a drill. While his subordinates waited for orders, Petrov made a decision that would redefine courage. He judged the warnings to be a false alarm and did not report the attack. In that moment, he alone held the fate threats everywhere. In reconnaissance flights, in military exercises, in what might simply have been technical malfunctions. The Soviet Union had developed an elaborate early warning system to detect American missile launches. Radar stations were scattered across the vast Soviet territory, each manned by teams of officers trained to spot incoming threats and immediately report them to command. The system was designed for speed and accuracy, because in nuclear warfare, seconds mattered. When the system detected an attack, the information was supposed to travel instantly to the Kremlin, triggering automatic retaliatory strikes. There was no time for debate, no opportunity for second thoughts. Petrov's assignment had taken him to Dushanbe, the capital of Tajik SSR, where he oversaw a detachment of roughly 30 officers and soldiers. Their mission was to monitor the skies for any sign of American aggression, day or night, in all weather conditions. The radar station was part of a larger network that fed data directly into the Central Command in Moscow. Every alert required immediate action. Every false alarm could mean catastrophe. The pressure on these officers was immense, but they understood their role in the chain of survival. On the morning of September 26, 1983, the routine monitoring operation suddenly became extraordinary. Petrov was on duty when his radar screens began displaying multiple targets converging on Soviet territory. The automated warning system triggered its loudest alerts, flooding the room with red lights and sirens. According to protocol, the detection of multiple missile launches constituted a full-scale nuclear attack. Petrov's team had just witnessed what appeared to be the beginning of World War III. The console displayed readings that matched every indicator of a massive American first strike. Hundreds of missile signatures showed up on their scopes, coming from the direction of the United States and following trajectories designed to hit major Soviet cities. The timing seemed deliberate, almost rehearsed, like a military exercise rather than a genuine attack. But exercises did not trigger automatic defense protocols. Only real threats did. Petrov's hand hovered over the button that would confirm the attack and set off the retaliation sequence. Around him, his subordinates exchanged nervous glances, waiting for orders. They had been trained for this moment, but never expected to see it. The air inside the bunker grew thick with tension as Petrov processed what he was seeing. Something about the presentation felt off. The precision of the simulated attack, the lack of accompanying bomber activity, the way the targets had appeared simultaneously rather than in waves. In his judgment, no real nuclear assault would be so methodical, so clean. Without speaking aloud, Petrov made his decision. He did not enter the attack confirmation into the system. Instead, he allowed the 10-minute window for verification to pass, giving the system time to reset and re-evaluate. As the minutes ticked by, the false alarms gradually faded from his screens. The threat had evaporated, leaving only the hum of machinery and the weight of what might have been. Petrov had just prevented the end of the world. The significance of his choice would not be fully understood for years. In the immediate aftermath, Petrov was debriefed and questioned about his actions. Officially, he had violated protocol by not reporting the attack, but in the words of some, the man who saved the world. His story became a testament to the power of individual conscience in the face of institutional pressure, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen in the quiet spaces between duty and discretion. The Cold War would continue for several more years, marked by other close calls and moments of tension. But September 26, 1983, remained unique. A single moment when humanity's survival hung in the balance, decided not by politicians or generals, but by an officer who trusted his instincts over the machines. In the annals of military history, few decisions carried such enormous consequence in such absolute silence. Petrov's choice would echo through the following decades, a quiet revolution in the philosophy of command, proving that in the nuclear age, the human element might be the most important variable of all. The legacy of the Serpukhov-15 bunker served as a grim mirror to the systemic flaws of the Soviet early warning system. As the Soviet military examined the failure of the Oko satellite network, they discovered a terrifying truth. The system was fundamentally flawed. The satellites had mistaken the reflection of the sun off high-altitude clouds for the launch plumes of American Minuteman missiles. This technical glitch was not a one-time error, but a systemic vulnerability that had left the Soviet Union blind to the difference between a natural phenomenon and a nuclear apocalypse. Inside the Kremlin, the tension remained high. General Secretary Yuri Andropov's health was failing, and the Soviet leadership was gripped by a paranoid fear of a preemptive strike. This paranoia was fueled by Operation Ryan, a massive intelligence-gathering effort designed to find evidence that the United States was preparing a first strike. The atmosphere in the war rooms of Moscow was one of suffocating anxiety, where every radar blip was viewed through the lens of suspicion. Petrov had operated within this climate of fear, where the official doctrine dictated that any warning of an attack must be met with an immediate, overwhelming retaliation. The Soviet military hierarchy lived by the rule of the red button. The command structure was designed to remove human hesitation, creating a streamlined path from detection to detonation. Had Petrov followed the manual, his report would have traveled instantly to the General Staff, where the decision to launch would have been made in minutes. The Red Army's strategic rocket forces, stationed in hidden silos across the frozen plains of Siberia and the Ukrainian steppes, would have ignited. Thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles would have streaked across the Arctic, targeting American cities, while the United States' own automated systems would have responded in kind. The result would have been a global firestorm, turning the cities of the West and the East into charred ruins. The ruins of Berlin, London, and Washington, D.C. would have mirrored the devastation of Stalingrad, but on a scale that would have ended civilization itself. The silence of the Serpukhov-15 bunker was the only thing that prevented this sequence of events. Petrov's refusal to signal the launch was a direct defiance of the very core of Soviet military discipline, which valued obedience over intuition. In the years following the incident, the Soviet Union attempted to quietly refine their satellite technology, but the fundamental flaw remained. The machines were incapable of doubt. Petrov, however, was a man defined by his skepticism. He understood that the Americans, if they were to launch a first strike, would not do so with only 5 missiles. A real attack would have involved hundreds of warheads, a saturation strike intended to wipe out the Soviet Union's ability to respond. This logical deduction was the thin line between survival and extinction. As the Cold War transitioned into the era of Mikhail Gorbachev, the world began to realize how close it had come to the brink. The late 1980s saw the signing of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, as both superpowers recognized that the risk of accidental war was far too high. The ghosts of 1983 haunted the negotiations, reminding leaders that a single computer error or a misunderstood signal could trigger a catastrophe. The era of mutually assured destruction had created a paradox where the more advanced the weaponry became, the more fragile the peace became. Petrov's later years were spent in a modest apartment, far removed from the grandeur of the military parades and the medals of the Red Army. He lived as an ordinary citizen, rarely speaking of the night the world almost ended. He did not see himself as a hero, but as a man who simply did his job by not making a mistake. He often remarked that he had merely acted according to common sense, yet in a system built on rigid dogma, common sense had become the most dangerous act of rebellion. When the story finally broke to the public, it sparked a global conversation about the morality of nuclear deterrence. Historians and military strategists began to analyze the human factor in command and control. The Petrov incident proved that the most sophisticated weaponry in the world was useless, and even lethal, without a human being capable of saying no. It highlighted the danger of trusting automated systems over human judgment, a lesson that continues to resonate in the modern age of artificial intelligence and autonomous weaponry. Today, the remnants of the Cold War's secret installations stand as silent monuments to a period of unprecedented terror. Abandoned bunkers and rusted missile silos across the former Soviet Union serve as reminders of a time when the fate of the planet rested on the shoulders of a few men in underground rooms. The story of Stanislav Petrov is not just a tale of a lucky guess, but a cautionary study in the fragility of global security. It remains a stark reminder that the survival of the human race has, at several points in history, depended on the courage of individuals who dared to question the machines. The silence of that September night remains one of the most significant silences in human history. While the world continued to turn, oblivious to the flashing red screens in a Russian bunker, the trajectory of the 21st century was decided. The streets of the world's great cities remained inhabited, the the forests remained green, and the archives of history recorded a victory not of arms, but of restraint. Stanislav Petrov died in 2018, leaving behind a legacy of quiet bravery that serves as a permanent warning to all who hold the keys to the apocalypse. The investigation that followed was conducted in the shadows of the Soviet military bureaucracy. Colonel General Yuri Votintsev, commander of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, summoned Petrov to the headquarters in Moscow. The interrogation was not a celebration of averted catastrophe. It was a procedural dissection of a breach in protocol. Petrov had not logged the event in the official combat duty journal. He had not reported the launch to his superiors immediately. He had, in the eyes of the bureaucracy, failed to follow the letter of the law. The investigators pored over the magnetic tapes of the Oko satellite system, the same tapes that had flashed the word START in bloody red letters across the screen. They found the flaw. The satellite, positioned in a highly elliptical Molniya orbit, had caught the sun's reflection off high-altitude clouds over the North Dakota missile fields. The alignment of sun, satellite, and cloud created a mirage of infrared signatures, mimicking the bloom of rising Minuteman ICBMs. The ground radar, the Korund and later the Dnepr and Daryel networks saw nothing. No rising trails, no warheads separating. The system had hallucinated a war. Vodintsev, a hardened veteran of the Great Patriotic War, understood the gravity of the machine's error. He also understood the political danger of admitting it. The Oko system was the crown jewel of Soviet strategic defense, a multi-billion ruble shield meant to give the general staff precious minutes to retaliate. Acknowledging that it could be fooled by sunlight undermined the entire doctrine of launch on warning. The official report buried the truth. Petrov was neither punished nor rewarded. He was sidelined. A promised promotion evaporated. A commendation was typed, then withdrawn. He was reassigned to a less sensitive post, researching the very satellite system that had nearly killed him. The message was clear. The system was infallible. The human was the variable. The year 1983 was a crucible of miscalculation. Weeks before Petrov's night shift, Korean Airlines Flight 007 had been shot down by a Soviet Su-15 interceptor over Sakhalin Island. 269 civilians perished. The Reagan administration denounced it as a massacre. The Kremlin called it a deliberate American provocation, a spy plane masquerading as an airliner. The rhetoric in Washington and Moscow hardened into something brittle and dangerous. In November, NATO conducted Exercise Able Archer 83, a command post simulation practicing the transition to nuclear release procedures. The simulation was so realistic. New codes, radio silence, heads of state participating. That Soviet intelligence, fed by the paranoid forecasts of the RYAN program, suspected it was a ruse to mask a real first strike. In the bunkers of the group of Soviet forces in Germany, commanders loaded nuclear warheads onto SS-20 Pioneers and RSD-10s. Bombers in the Far East taxied to runway thresholds, engines screaming. The world balanced on a razor's edge, and the Soviet early warning system, the very eyes of the Politburo, was blinking red with a phantom attack. Petrov's story remained a state secret for a decade. The Soviet Union collapsed. The archives opened. In 1998, Yuri Votintsev published his memoirs, Breaking the Silence. He wrote that Petrov's correct assessment of the situation had prevented a retaliatory strike. The world learned the name of the duty officer at Serpukhov 15. The man who saved the world became a reluctant celebrity. He traveled to the United Nations. He received the World Citizen Award. He stood at the Minuteman Missile National Historic Site in South Dakota, staring down the silo of the very weapon the satellite had hallucinated. He was a small man, soft-spoken, uncomfortable with the mantle of heroism. "I was just doing my job," he repeated, again and again. "I was in the right place at the right time." But the right place was a chair in a concrete box, and the right time was a moment when the machinery of Armageddon hiccuped. The Oko satellites were eventually replaced by the EKS system, the Unified Space System, designed to watch the Earth with infrared eyes that could distinguish a cloud glint from a rocket plume. The Dnepr and Daryel radars were modernized into the Voronezh network, scanning the horizons from Armavir to Orsk. The technology improved. The speed of decision compressed further. The Dead Hand System, Perimeter, a semi-automatic retaliatory mechanism designed to launch even if the leadership was decapitated, remained on duty. Its existence, confirmed only years later, proved that the Soviets had built a doomsday machine governed by logic gates and seismic sensors, a final guarantee that even if the men in the bunkers hesitated, the missiles would fly. The Norwegian rocket incident of 1995 proved the lesson had not fully penetrated. a Black Brant X-side research rocket, launched from Andoya to study the aurora borealis, arced high over the Barents Sea. Its trajectory, speed, and staging profile perfectly mimicked a U.S. Trident SLBM launched from a submarine, headed for a high-altitude nuclear detonation to blind Russian radar, the precursor to a massive first strike. The Russian nuclear briefcase, the Cheget, was brought to President Boris Yeltsin. The defense minister, Pavel Grachev, and the chief of the general staff, Mikhail Kolesnikov, stood by the phone. For the first time in history, the Russian Nuclear Command Authority activated the Kazbek command system. The submarine commanders in the bastions of the White Sea and the Pacific Fleet received the preliminary warning. 8 minutes ticked by. The rocket's third stage fell away. The radar tracked the payload falling into the ocean, not rising toward Moscow. The briefcase was closed. The submarine stood down. Yeltsin later wrote that the incident terrified him. The Cold War was over, the budgets were slashed, the early warning radars had gaps, and the satellites were aging. The machine had almost fired again. Today, the silos of the strategic rocket forces still dot the steppes from Kozelsk to Yasnaya. The road-mobile Topol-M and Yars complexes patrol the forest roads of the taiga. The Bore-class submarines slip beneath the Arctic ice. The command and control systems are faster, the encryption quantum-resistant, the sensors hyperspectral. But the architecture of deterrence remains the same. A pyramid of sensor data funneling into a human decision window measured in minutes. The integration of artificial intelligence into early warning analysis, pattern recognition algorithms sifting petabytes of infrared noise, promises speed. It also promises the automation of Petrov's dilemma. An algorithm does not have a funny feeling in its gut. It does not know the geopolitical context of Able Archer or the downing of KL-007. It knows only the pattern match. If the pattern matches launch, the probability score rises. The threshold is crossed. The alert is sent. In the quiet of the Serpukhov 15 Museum, preserved consoles blink with simulated data. School groups pass through, listening to guides explain the night the world didn't end. The magnetic tape reels sit in glass cases, brown oxide ribbons holding the ghost of a false sun. The bunker air is cool, smelling of ozone and old electronics. Outside, the birch trees sway in the wind off the Moscow River. The satellites overhead, American and Russian and Chinese, watch the cloud tops glint in the dawn. They count the heat blooms. They calculate the trajectories. They wait for the one that is real. And somewhere, in a chair very much like Petrov's, a human watches the screen, waiting